And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Rebecca Harper is a professor of literacy at Augusta University. She has served as an invited speaker and keynote for a variety of literacy conferences and has delivered literacy professional development sessions across the country. Her research interests include sociocultural theory and critical literacy and content and disciplinary literacy. She is the author of 3 Corwin books, Write Now and Write On, Writing Workouts, and her newest title, Write from the Beginning for grades K through 5, 43 Joyful Lessons to Foster Skilled Writers Every Day, which will be hot off the press next week. And that is also the topic of today's webinar. And now I will turn it over to Rebecca Harper.
So thanks, Margaret. Thanks for having me here. Anytime that I can get in front of people and have anybody listen to me talk about writing, I'm thrilled to do it. So what we're going to talk about tonight are just some really quick and fast things that you can use in your classrooms that can get your students writing daily, writing well, and writing often. So a lot of times when we look at how writing is taught or how we think it should be taught, in some cases, we make it harder than it should be. It's really actually a lot of fun, but unfortunately, the way that we typically teach it in the classroom with scripts and curriculum materials and ready-made prompts don't really work well with the people who we have in front of us. So I tell teachers all the time that before I can teach the what, I have to know the who. And everything that I do that is connected to writing and really in teaching and instruction in general is connected to who do I have in front of me. And so how do I get people to look at what they're doing in their daily lives and see what they're reading and writing daily, and how I can turn that around and use that as spendable capital in the classroom for those academic standards that I have to teach. Because a lot of those same things that our kids are doing outside of school are what we're asking them to do in classes. They just don't know that there's a connection. So some really quick things that you can do. Now, I'm a former middle grades teacher, not on purpose, on accident. I needed a job, but I have a degree in elementary education. And one of the things that I noticed about my lesson planning and my teaching is that I could not function with strategies and types of activities and engagements that required me to spend a whole lot of time prepping and getting ready. So everything that we're going to talk about today is very simplistic. You don't have to spend a whole bunch of time after school doing it. You don't have to collate copies and color code everything and have it all laid out the day before. You don't need to do any of that. What you really need you need some Post-its, you need some paint strips from the hardware store, you need note cards, and you need pencils and highlighters and pens, and then you'll be good to go. You'll be set for the entire year. So that's all you need to ask for on your supply list. So I've got some things here. I'm going to show you some examples. So right around the text is a super easy strategy that you can use, that you can modify based on whatever you have in front of you, whoever you have in front of you, and whatever content you have. So you can use it for narrative text and you take a piece of the text and you put it on a big piece of chart paper, or you can have it on a piece of regular paper. It doesn't really matter to me. And you have students write their comments, their reflections, what they think, their noticings around that narrative piece. It also works really well for informational writing. So you'll see later when I'm talking to you that I'll show you an example of a primary classroom where we started research writing and we used Right Around the Text to do that. I use paint strips all the time, y'all. I mean, for whatever. And I like paint strips because I can color code based on my source, or I can color code based on what I'm talking about. I can use it for different types of vocabulary. So I'm going to show you several different things that you can use there. And then I do a lot of sketch to stretch activities. So when we think about our students who are in second grade-ish, all right, and they're reading a lot of picture books. And so if you don't know the words, you can use the image to fix up your meaning and to figure out, like if you don't know the word rabbit, but you see that picture of a rabbit, you might say that's a bunny, right? Your meaning doesn't break down because you're using that image to help you make sense of that text that you might not know the word for. But when you get to third and fourth grade, all that stuff goes away for the most part, and you'll see a lot of novels. So kids don't have those images in front of them to help them. But we know that visualization is a key indicator for comprehension. So when you are reading something, even if you don't have pictures in front of you, you should have this running record in your head, this running movie of what you see in the story. But a lot of our students don't actively do that. So I'm going to show you some sketch to stretch activities that we've done. And then this mix and match activity is one of my very favorites for implementing research writing into your classroom with multiple sources and using paint strips. And it's a whole lot less painful than giving the students an outline. But let me show you some examples. So this is a sketch to stretch that I did in a first grade classroom. So this is from the Gruffalo. And if you know that book, it's a super quick and fast children's book, but it describes this Gruffalo, who is this fictional monster in the woods, right? And it tells you what he looks like based on the textual evidence. So it'll say that he's got, purple prickles down his back, and he's got orange eyes, and he's got tusks and turned out toes and knobby knees. So what I did with this activity is I read to these first graders, but I didn't show them the pictures. Now, let me tell you one caveat, guys. If you are asking your students to draw or listen or pick out figurative language that they hear from a story or anything like that, they have to have heard that story at least once. Because the first time that you hear something, you're just hearing it for the story. You're trying to figure out like what's happening here. So don't have them do this unless they've heard the story one time before, okay? So the second time that I read this story to them, I still didn't show them the pictures. And what I did the second time, because remember, they've already heard the story, they already know what happened. I gave them a piece of paper and said, okay, when you hear the author tell you something about the Gruffalo, I want you to draw what you hear. And so by the time we got done, they had these pictures of the Gruffalo. And this is first grade, y'all. And so when we got finished, everybody has their Gruffalo at their desk. And then I gave them Post-its, and I went back into the text, and I started at the beginning, and I said, okay, it says in here that he has tusk. How many of you have tusk in your picture? You raise your hand. So I wrote tusk on the board. I gave him a Post-it and said, write down tusk and put it next to your picture where you see his tusks. How many of you have orange eyes? I'm gonna write it on the board, copy it on your Post-it, stick it down on your paper. So by the time they got done, these first graders had this image of this Gruffalo, but then they also have supported their image with textual evidence. I could even take this a step further and give them page numbers, and they could do citations. But again, first grade, we're hitting comprehension, but we're also hitting textual evidence as well, just in this real quick lesson. Here's another way you can do a visualization activity. This is something I do called cast the character. And what I do with this is I'll take a novel, and after we've read a little bit of it, then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, there's a casting call for this person, this character in the novel. Here are the people who showed up to audition for this role. Who's going to get a call back? Let's go back into the novel and let's find textual evidence that supports each of these different characters, and then let's determine who's going to get a call back. Now, there's different ways that you can do that. You could do it together as a class, like I have here on this slide. Or what I do sometimes is I'll give different groups a picture of a possible candidate for this job, for this particular casting. And then I will give them address labels like you would stick on an envelope. And I'll say, okay, I want you to look in your book and find any evidence that would support why you're this person that you have on your paper, on your picture, should be cast. And I'll have them stick the address labels on the back of that photo. So when they get up to share with the class, they're holding their photo up like this, okay? And you can't really see this because it's filter. But what they're able to do is, as they're holding their picture up and showing you what this person looks like, on the back, they have their address labels with their textual evidence, so they can read directly off there. And then as a class, you all determine, okay, who should be cast. Now, you could also do this. You don't have to just do it with characters. You can do it with settings. You could do it with objects in the story. So in A Snicker of Magic, there's a family in that story who the mom drives a van that they call a pickled jalapeno. And so I found several different images of green cars, and I had them determine which one most likely represented what the pickled jalapeno looked like based on the textual evidence. So I'm teaching that visualization piece. I'm also assessing comprehension, but I'm also going back and doing the textual evidence and their writing. And all of those things count. So most of the writing that your kids are going to do every day is never going to make it to publication. It's never going to make it to the published process. It's never going to be, final, because no real writing is final. Okay. There's always something you can go back and change. But most of what your kids are going to do on a daily basis that's going to get them trained and strong when it comes to writing skills and stamina are quick and fast things. They're going to be ugly. They're going to be rough. They're going to be drafty. They're never going to get out of that format. But the type of writing they're doing daily is that writing to think, writing to process, writing to live, which is what we do in the real world. Now, this is something that's a little more sophisticated, and a little more researchy. But this is how I start teaching an argument. Okay, so if I'm working with upper elementary, middle grades, or high school, I can make the same strategy work for any grade level. So what I'll start off with is I'll bring in articles on a topic that we might be able to write an argument about. So in this case, we were writing about virtual schooling. Okay. And so I brought in several different articles, and I assigned a certain color paint strip for each different article. Okay. So we had, a purple article, a blue article, and a pink article. And each time we're reading, we're looking for the same types of information. Okay. So we're looking for the pros of virtual schooling and the cons. Now, that's really important, because how many of you have ever given your students something to read and said, highlight the important stuff, and your kids have highlight everything? Well, that's really not their fault, because they don't know what they're highlighting for. So it's like, important to whom? I'm not sure if I should highlight this because I don't know if it's important or not. So I'm going to highlight everything, or I'm going to highlight nothing. Well, that's because they don't have an established purpose for reading. And if you've ever read any of Chris Tavani's work, she talks about how important it is to set a purpose for reading and how that affects comprehension. So when we're reading these articles about virtual schooling, every time we read, we're looking for pros and cons. So guess what? So when I give them article 1 and I give them the paint strip, I'm saying, all right, when you read this, you're going to look for pros and cons. That's all you're looking for. Okay. And that can help your students stay focused on what would be considered important, because now they know why they're reading. So we did that for a couple of days where we read, several different articles. Well, then the next day we come in, and you'll see on the right-hand side, I have these 2 paint strips that say claims and support. So what I'll do after they've read is I'll go back and say, okay, now I'm going to give you 2 new paint strips. And I typically get the ones that are this size that have just 3 options. I need you to come up with 3 claims that you could now write based on what you've read. Okay. And then for each of those claims, I want you to give me 1 piece of evidence. So you notice how I have those paint strips set next to each other? It's because claim 1 is supported by support 1, claim 2, support 2, claim 3, support 3. All right. Now, remember, I told you I don't have time to do all this extra stuff and extra planning. Okay, I want to work smarter and not harder. So then what I'm going to do is, after my children leave, I'm going to take the claims that they've written, and I'm going to choose, I don't know, my favorite 7. I just make up a number, okay? And then either I'm going to put them on chart paper like you'll see in the middle picture, or I'm going to put them on a piece of paper like you see on the left-hand side. Now let's start with what I did on the left-hand side. So I took claims that my own students wrote. I took the top 7. Okay. And I put 1 claim per piece of paper. So when the kids come in the next day, those are displayed somewhere in the room. I say, get out your paint strip sources from where we were reading about virtual schooling yesterday and the day before. I'm going to give you a pair of scissors, and I want you to cut these paint strips into those individual pieces. So now we have all these little cards, these little paint strip cards. And you're going to go around the room with, a group of people, a small group, and you're going to go to each one of these claims, and you're going to drop off any evidence that you have that supports that claim. That's going to be my bell ringer, people. So what they did on Wednesday is their classroom activity, or their work period, is going to be my bell ringer, or my springboard for my bell ringer the next day. So after they've done that, guess what? Now we have 7 claims sitting around the classroom that already have evidence. And from those 7 claims, I'm going to ask them, which of these should we write about? Because what I want them to see is that we should write about the ones that have the most evidence across the most number of sources. Okay, especially if the instructional demand or the state assessment is asking us to use multiple sources. So if you've got a lot of evidence for one of your claims, but it only comes from the blue source, if you go back to the demands of the assignment, are you going to score proficient? You won't because you only have one source. So we're looking for not just claims that have a lot of evidence, but claims that have a lot of evidence across sources. So from that, I can eliminate the ones that don't fit those qualifications. And then now I have four solid claims from which we can start writing. And then that is a way that I start scaffolding students into writing their own argument. Now, if you don't have paint strips and you have Post-its, you can do what I did here in this middle picture. I did the same thing, except I used Post-its instead of paint strips. And we color coded again. So there's a pink article, there's a yellow article, there's a blue article, and a gray article. So I still am able to keep up with sources and citations. And by the way, y'all, you have to color code, because when you get ready to write this argument as a fully involved paper, you're going to have to go back and be able to cite. And I can cite as long as I have everything from Article 1 on the pink paint strip. I know that that's, Harper 2002, right? So that's the whole that's important for color coding. And you'll see in this middle picture, this is actually a day after we had matched evidence to claims. Now we started sorting evidence, and so I had the students then go to each. I would put a group at each anchor chart. And I said, okay, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to sort the evidence: strong, middle, and weak. Now, you can't just jump in and assume that they know how to sort evidence. They're not going to. So there's an activity I do with this as an activator. So what I'll do as a visual example of what's strong, middle of the road, and weak evidence, I use puzzle pieces. So I'll take three puzzles that from the house, okay? And I'll take like 10 pieces from one puzzle that's nothing but blue sky. And I'll take about 5 pieces from another puzzle that might be, I don't know, animal fur, or, a part of a car, or something that's a little more specific, but still pretty generic. And then I'll take one piece from a puzzle, and it might be a piece that has the Little Mermaid's face on it. Okay. So I'll put those in little baggies. And then I'll have students either, with a partner in a small group, I'll say, I want you to take these puzzle pieces out on your desk. And I want you to sort based on which puzzle pieces go together for the same original puzzle, like which ones belong together. And what they'll have is a pile of blue sky, a pile of animal fur or car parts, and then one piece of the Little Mermaid's face. And I'll ask, look at your pile with the most pieces. What do you think that puzzle looks like in general, the whole picture? Well, they can't tell you because it's just blue sky. So it's very generic. It's too vague. Do the same thing for your second pile. Well, you might be able to tell me a little bit more that maybe it's an animal or whatever, but you're not really sure if it's an animal, if it's a animal rug, or if it's actually an animal at the zoo. Okay. But then look at that one piece that's the Little Mermaid. You probably can tell that that puzzle is going to have the Little Mermaid in it. So it's probably, a Little Mermaid puzzle. So then I asked my students, so tell me why in the pile that you have the most evidence, why can't you tell me what that overall picture is, but you can when you have one piece of evidence? Do you want to know why? Because the evidence that you have in that big pile is weak. The evidence you have in the pile with one is strong. So you can write one strong, solid, good, specific sentence and say more than these 10 sentences over here where you're telling me the character's nice over and over and over again. So that would be my activator for this lesson that you see in the middle. So now that I've shown them, all right, y'all, these are the kind of sentences I'm looking for. I need specific detail. Okay. Not generic, not blue sky stuff. Give me that specific thing. So you could just have to write one sentence instead of 10. Now we're going to sort our sentences into those piles. What's strong, what's middle of the road, and what's weak. Because see, then guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to now take the stuff that's middle of the road and weak, and I'm going to do a mini lesson on sentence combining. So now I'm incorporating grammar into this activity. It's not in isolation, because we know the research says grammar in isolation, it doesn't work. So now it's purposeful grammar, because I'm teaching them how to take these weak sentences, pair them with a middle of the road sentence, and now we have strong evidence. So then it becomes purposeful. So then when you're teaching, if one of your grammar standards is sentence variety or sentence structure, compound, complex, and dependent clauses and independent clauses, bam, you just taught that. But you taught it within the context of an argument, and it's a lot more purposeful. Okay. It's a lot easier when you do it this way. And then by the time, you do that, now you're on Thursday or Friday, and that's been your entire week on argument. And you're doing a little bit each day. And by the time you get done, you've written an entire argument. Now, here's how I might start some other parts of an argument. So this one on the left-hand side, I have a lot of kids when they're doing research, and I read what they're saying, I'll say, well, where's your citation? Where's your evidence? And they'll say, well, I already knew that. And I'm like, cool, well, I'm glad you knew it, but where's your evidence? And a lot of kids get their feelings hurt because they're like, well, I knew it. Why is that not important enough? So what I do is if it's a topic that a lot of kids know a lot about already, I'll give them a paint strip like this and I'll say, make a list of all the things you know about why virtual schooling is important or why students should be able to bring their cell phones to school. Tell me why, okay? Then what I'll do is I'll say, okay, these are all things you already knew about this topic, right? Cool. I'm gonna give you a new paint strip. Now you need to go find a source that supports what you say. So I'm validating that you already know this stuff. So thanks for the knowledge. But I'm also teaching the demands of the standard, which is I need you to cite evidence. Okay. So you told me that people need to use their cell phones at school because they're emergencies. Okay. Give me some stats behind that. In Article 3, remember we read the other day, what could you find that would support what you're already saying? So this works well for topics that students already have a solid background knowledge about. It doesn't work as well when it's a brand new topic. But if you've got something kids already know a lot about and they're going to tell you, I already knew this, here's a way to combat that. And then this is something from an elementary class on the right hand side where they were doing a research project. Now it wasn't an argument, but it goes back to the research piece of using paint strips. And in this case, this student was researching George Lucas, and they had to find 3 facts from each article they read about their person they were doing a biography on. So you'll see right here, this is an example of 2 sources, and he's giving you 3 facts from each source, which then he's going to later take and put into the actual composition. And then this, people, is a fully involved argument using nothing but paint strips. Okay, so here's another way that you can teach argument in a more engaging way. So I start off with, you see at the top, I had this yellow big paint strip. That's my claim. And everything that supports my claim is in green below. But remember, I have to also include the counterclaim. So my counterclaim is going to be on red because that's like, stop, hold up, wait a minute. What are the opposing side? What are they going to say? So my counterclaim is included in red. But I have to slow down and I have to address that counterclaim and I have to talk about it. So that yellow is going to be my addressing that counterclaim. More green evidence is going to be evidence that supports the claim that I started with, and then I'm going to close with my claim. So if you look at this way, it's a lot easier for me as a teacher. If I'm across the room and I see that somebody has made it all the way to red, I can holler across the room and say, hey, you haven't addressed your counterclaim. Same thing with peer collaboration. It's a lot easier for them to give peer feedback because now I am connecting it to a color coding. So if you have a student who's not quite sure how to give feedback, this is a little bit easier. They can say, well, you haven't included your counterclaim yet because you don't have anything read. And the stuff on the right hand side is basically just how they started finding evidence that would support their claim. I would not make them write this over again, y'all. Now, for an assessment, they're going to have to. And so I suggest that teachers have a chart in your room as a T-chart, and I have one side says fun way and one side says the test way. Because if you don't show students what the assessment's going to look like or what's going to be available on the assessment, they're going to be really disappointed when the boring test people don't allow them to use paint strips, index cards, and Post-its. So I always show this is how we do it. This is the cool way and the fun way that we do it in Harper's class. Here's how you're going to have to do it on the assessment because those people aren't as cool as we are. So you're going to have to draw this out. You're going to have to draw a bubble map. You're going to have to draw a Foursquare. But we're going to do it with Post-its because we rock. So make sure that you show students how this looks on regular boring paper. But the first few times that they do this, I would not make them copy it over on paper. I would staple this together and hang it out in the hallway. All right. There's your bulletin board display. There's your display of student work. So when you're doing your teacher evaluation and they check to make sure that you display student work, you've done it. So check that off and go home. Okay. But when you start looking at how might I do this on an assessment where I don't have these options, here's how I can show you. You can do the exact same thing. But them seeing that they can do it this way, this is a lot more accessible and a lot more engaging. And so it makes it a little bit easier for them to take, because they've done it this way, to then turn around and do it in a boring way. Okay. And then here's some more things that I do with paint strips. So there's a standard that you see across the board throughout middle school as a character evolution standard. It'll talk about how characters evolve and change through the course of a novel or work of story or story based on events that happen, interactions with characters, et cetera, et cetera. High school, you typically see this standard as more of a coming of age story. So basically, it's talking about the same thing. It's saying how has this character evolved and changed over the course of a certain number of events and amount of time. Well, what I see students doing a lot of is they'll tell me whatever happened to that character most recently. So they don't really have a prolonged or expansive explanation of all the things that happened to that character. So you end up normally with the things that happened to them that were the high points or things that happened most recently closer to the end. So what I'll do is on this left-hand side, these two long paint strips, I give students one where as they're reading, they write down things that happen to the character that are important and pivotal. So that becomes the green paint strip actually we functions as a bookmark, okay? And as they're reading, the big things that happen to this character get put in box by box. So now I'm able to check for comprehension. All right, so I can check that standard. But then I'm gonna give them this red or this pink paint strip and I'm gonna put it next to it and I'm gonna say, look at what happened to them, the first thing that happened to them. Tell me how that changed that character. Look at the second thing. How did that change that character? And see, because they're looking at less text every time, it makes it a little more manageable. This is the same kind of thing that happens to students when they have to summarize and they struggle with that because they either tell you everything or nothing. It's because you're taking a huge amount of text and you're having to basically whittle it down to, just the nuts and bolts. And for a lot of kids, that's too much text to weed through. Same thing with this. It's too much of a novel to weed through to try to figure out all these things that happen to this character way back in chapter, 5, and there's 50 chapters. But if I keep record as I'm reading, then when I get ready to go back and trace how that character evolved, I have those pivotal moments. And then I can go, oh, that one thing affected him this way. This one thing affected him this way. And then you end up with a much more comprehensive view of the evolution of that character. And this one on the right is the same thing. It's just a more truncated version. So instead of having, 7 examples, you've got 3. 3 things that happened to this character and 3 ways that it changed them and caused him to evolve over time. So just a housekeeping thing, if you will. You're teaching comprehension, but you're still also teaching that standard. And this is the right around the text that we were talking about earlier. So this is one super easy way if you're introducing students into research, okay? Because here's the thing. A lot of nonfiction, a lot of informational stuff is boring. It's just not super exciting, okay? It just isn't. And I hate that that's the way a lot of informational text that we see. It's just not real engaging. But there's a lot of really great informational text that you can use, like Amy Stewart's Wicked Bugs, the louse that conquered Napoleon's army, and Wicked Plants, the weed that killed Lincoln's mother. Oh my gosh, they're some of my favorite books because they have highly engaging informational text that's pretty short. They're like 4 pages each, and they're fantastic for read aloud. I was just in a middle school last week, and I used one of those excerpts as my read aloud, and we did a word splash with it, and it was wonderful. But you got to find informational text that is, number one, accessible, that the students can read, and 2, engaging and that they can understand. So start with things that they might be interested in, because what happens sometimes with informational text is we have kids who are trying to attack it the way we attack a narrative. And they're looking for a plot and characters and a climax and a resolution, and they're really sorry to hear out here that it's just a textbook about sales. But that's because they don't know how to attack that different type of text structure. So give them something that they're interested in, and then that allows you to be able to teach that text structure in a different way. So there's a great fiction book that you could connect with this. I'm really trying to love spiders. So you might read that as your read aloud, and then here's your informational text that about spiders. And so what I did with this activity is I gave students different informational text passages based on what they were interested in. And then I gave them 3 post-its and said, I need you to find 3 things you didn't know about whatever this thing is you're about to read and write them on this post-it. That gets them thinking about, okay, this is what research writing might look like. I'm reading these articles to try to find out facts that I'm going to then turn around and write about. So that's how I started it. You could also do it. Here's a final product where we were studying, we were doing a project on animals. And we actually started, I'm gonna kick ahead for 1 second. We started by looking at pictures like this. And this is, again, this is a write around the text. And I had students go around the room with their Post-its, and I had them look at the different pictures and come up with questions that they would want to have answered about this animal. So what that does is that also helps the student establish a purpose for research. So if these are the questions that I want to answer about this iguana or this fox, when I'm reading, these are the things I'm going to look for. And so when they did their final draft, which looks something like this, you see how we're taking those things that they were asking questions about and now putting them on the address labels and almost creating our own infographic here. But it would have been a lot more difficult if we had not started with these questions, because these questions allowed us to determine what kind of sources we needed and also how we needed to read and what we needed to read for. And then I use music in my class all the time. So there's all different kinds of things that you can do with music. It's highly engaging. It's a great way to bring in student interest as well. So voice is something that's really difficult to teach. It is very ambiguous and nebulous. And it's kind of one of those things that, like, I know it when I hear it. And so I use different covers of songs to teach voice. And my favorite to use is Michael Jackson's Billie Jean and several different versions of that song. So I'll use David Cook's version from American Idol. I'll use the Honey Wagons, which is a bluegrass version. And then I close with Michael Jackson. And so what we do is we look at we have the same lyrics. And this is, guys, at middle school, high school, okay, pick a different song, pick some different songs for elementary, okay? But Billie Jean works great in middle and high school. And so what we talk about is how the song, the lyrics don't change, but somehow when we listen to David Cook, it sounds like he misses this woman, like he loved her and he's sad. And somehow with those same words, when we listen to Michael Jackson, he's like, I don't even know who that girl is. I don't know who she is. The lyrics don't change. What does? The voice and how that song is presented. So your key, your tempo, everything. So then we talk about, okay, in writing, how do we, when we're reading and we're reading about characters and things, how are we able to convey voice, the author's voice? So that becomes a tangible example. And then I use lyrics for textual evidence all the time. All right. And you can use that for like analyzing for figurative language or analyzing for character or anything like that. I use lyrics a lot for playlists, for creating soundtracks for novels. That's a great thing to do. Sometimes I'll do ringtones. So like I'll play a ringtone when people are coming in, and I'll say which character is calling, which character would be calling us based on this ringtone. Tell me who and why. Walkout songs, and that's all this stuff is real world stuff that happened to me or I've seen, and I thought, man, this would work. This would be great for me to use to teach writing. And so all my children are swimmers. And when we were at a swim meet and I was listening to these children who had picked if you're the top seed in prelims, you get to pick your walkout song for finals. And these children were picking pitiful walkout songs. They were walking out to Little Einstein's theme song. It was awful. And I remember sitting in the stands going, have none of these parents shown these children Rocky? Did they never see Apollo Creed walk out to James Brown? You know, with the when he held the American flag trunks. Did nobody watch it? Does nobody watch MMA anymore? And so I went back to my office and thought, how can I make this work? So what we did is and I did this in a second grade class all the way to my college students. Okay. And so what I'll have students do is I'll have them make a list of their character traits, your personal character traits. And then I'll have you find a song that supports those character traits. And then give me the textual evidence that supports that. So what we do is, like, on Wednesdays, this is what we did in the second grade class, we had Walkout Wednesday. And so every Wednesday, one little second grader got to come up to the front of the room and describe themselves with their character traits and say, the song that I chose is such and such because, and they would quote the lyrics. That's your textual evidence. And then when they would leave to go to car line and the bus lot, they would walk out to whatever that song was. So that, and y'all, that was powerful because I'm still teaching those same academic standards, but in a much more engaging way. You could also do playlists, and this was another real world thing that happened with my children. My middle daughter swims, and we were sitting in the car, and her coach had shared her playlist for swim. Well, she thought that she had only shared the playlist that they listen to when they're at swim practice, okay, with the entire team. But she shared every playlist that she had. And so my middle daughter is sitting in the car with me in the driveway, and she says, "Mama, listen to these songs and let's see if we can figure out what was going on with Coach Shannon's life." I think she was, somebody hurt her feelings, or I think this is when she started going to church, or I think this is when that guy broke up with her. And so we're sitting there and we're listening at what she's listening this stuff out, and I'm like, "Yep, that's what it sounds like." And then I got real quiet, and she looked at me and she said, "You're going to do it, aren't you? You're going to use it for teaching." I said, "Absolutely." So that came back to like, now how can we use that real world thing, the playlist that we probably have in our own phone when we're working out, or when we are stressed out at work, or when we are tired or sad or whatever. How do we use that for teaching? So I might say, all right, I want you to create a playlist for this particular mood if I'm teaching mood writing, or create a playlist for this particular character, and then tell me, why. And then what I can do is, after you've created these playlists for me, when kids walk in, I might play a smattering of those, snippets of the songs from somebody's playlist and say, "Okay, which character is this? Y'all tell me." And see, then I'm still doing comprehension as well. It'd be great in social studies, y'all. That'd be a great review if you had students create playlists based on historical figures or historical events. And then even in March or April, when you're not studying this thing anymore that you studied in September, but you can play the songs and say, "Hey, y'all remember what time period was this? Listen to the songs." So it still becomes a teachable moment as well. And then this is something I found in National Geographic. So don't rule out, where you're going to find ideas for writing. You never know. This was an infographic in National Geographic. It's a informational piece about your heartbeats per minute for different physical activities, and it correlates to certain songs that had the same beat per minute. And so what I did with this is I played a song from each section, because would you believe it or not that some of our children don't know who the Bee Gees or Prince are, so you got to show them. So I'd play a little piece from each section, and then I would put students with a partner and say, "Your job is to add one more song to each of these categories." Now, if you're worried about students and, inappropriate lyrics, y'all, there's a way around that. Create a master list, have a binder of songs that are options, and have them choose from there, but it still can work in your class. And then for extended writing, this is something that I did. This is from a third grade class. And what we did here is, this is us using paint strips when we already know what we want our paper to be about, meaning that we already know that we're going to have three key components, and we're going to divide our paper that way. So in this particular case, this was a social studies class, and the teacher wanted the students to write about how the American Indians respected the land, how they respected animals, and how they respected each other. So those were our three paragraphs in our paper. So then we took three different color paint strips, and when they were doing research, anything that had to do with how they respected each other went on the blue paint strip. Anything that went with how they respected the land on another color paint strip, and so on, until we had filled up all three paint strips. And then I did a real quick mini lesson, showed them how to write from note format until to a complete sentence. And y'all, don't be tempted to skip that part, or they're going to copy what they wrote in shorthand onto a note card, and don't say I didn't tell you so. Make sure that you do a real quick mini lesson. And you could also have some sentence starters and sentence stems that can help your students who might be those striving writers. Then what they do is, everything that's on the blue paint strip goes on a note card, everything on the gold one, another note card, everything on the green one, another note card, staple it together, and bam, you got yourself a 3-paragraph essay. Then what I'll do is I'll get 2 Post-its, and I'll say, "What is this paper about?" Well, it's about how the American Indians respected the land, each other, and animals. Cool. Super boring sentence, but it will get you to pass on the assessment. So write that on a Post-it. Now, if you want to do the conclusion, okay, we're going to use the same sentence, but we're going to tell our reader we're done. And by tell our reader we're done, we are not going to say the end, and we are not going to say, "I hope you like my paper." We're going to say something like, "As you can see, these are the ways that the American Indians respected the land, each other, and animals." It's boring, but it is effective. Okay. That's how I teach a multi-paragraph essay, and it works. And then here's a way that you can do a multi-source constructive response that is multi-part. So a lot of times we'll have constructive response prompts that are multi-part, and a lot of our students will choose one thing to do, one question to answer, and then they don't answer the rest of the stuff. So part of that is because it's too much at one time. So this is the way that I teach it. So first of all, I start off with finding the sources. Okay. So in most cases, they have multiple sources. So in this particular example, we have 3 sources. I didn't have the longer paint strips, so that's why you have 2 of each color. But this is about the dangers and the safety measures that have been dangers of football and the safety measures that have been put in place. Okay. Remember how I told you earlier that you have to set a purpose for reading? That's why I'm telling you this now. It's because every single time that those kids read an article about football, they're looking for the safety measures and they're looking for the dangers. That helps give them tunnel vision for what they should be reading and looking for. That way, if they happen to read about some particular wide receiver who has these amazing stats, they don't highlight him because it's cool. Because unless it's talking about safety measures or unless it's talking about dangers, we don't care about that player. Now, if that player says, I've been in the NFL for 15 years and I've seen how the helmets have evolved and the ones we have now are much safer than the ones we had in 1985, then yes, that is pertinent. But the fact that he has X number of touchdowns, we don't care because that's not our purpose for reading. So we read these 3 articles. We had however many boxes or how many pieces of information I'm looking for. So that helps me with how long does this need to be? Okay. So after we've done that, I had them cut it in pieces, just like we did with the argument that I showed you 12 slides before. And then remember I told you this is for a multi-part constructive response. So I took that multi-part constructive response prompt and I busted it into the individual things that it's asking. And so what I did was I would put an individual one on each piece of, on each Post-it. And then I would say, all right, here's your question. Give me any evidence that you have across your 3 sources that answers this question. That helps because number one, again, it's color coded. So it's easy for me across the room to say, hey, you didn't include source 3 because there's no blue article. It helps with peer feedback because they can do the same thing. It's great for revision because they're not Post-its, they're paint strip boxes. I can scoot them around and model revision. So I can see how it would sound if I start with this sentence versus this one. Then the next thing that I can do is I can put a new question down and I can say, hey, does this answer the new question? I mean, this new question. The answer should be no. But a lot of our students pick up textual evidence and just drop it down and think it's going to magically answer anything that we ask. This is a good tangible way to say, listen, the evidence you have, it's good evidence because it came from this book or this came from this passage, but it doesn't answer just any magic question that you ask about this text. So then you have to shuffle. So because you got a new question, you pull away all the stuff that doesn't answer it and you put new stuff. And then what you could do, and I don't have an example here, I don't have the picture, but what I typically do is I'll give them an envelope and I'll have them take their Post-it and take all their evidence and stick it inside an envelope and I take it up on the way out the door. When they come in the next day, I'll pass out the envelopes just to random people. So you get a different person's envelope. And then you take out the question. They've already given you all the answers, all the evidence that answers that question. And then on the front of the envelope where you would normally address to your friend, you're going to write your answer to your constructive response there. That becomes my bell ringer. So remember how I told you what I'm doing today is going to help lead me in the next day? When they get finished with this activity right here that you see in front of you, I'm going to have them put it in an envelope, turn it into me. When they come in the next day, that's going to be your bell ringer because now you're going to have to actually string those pieces of evidence together to write your constructive response to that prompt. And then just some different things that you can do. There's all different kinds of exit slips you can do, y'all. And there's a bunch of these in writing workouts. So there's earth, wind, and fire. What's solid under your feet? What's still blowing around in your head? What are you on fire for? There's 3, 2, 1, AC/DC, all kinds of different ones. But those count as writing. And then quick writes, that I started every middle school class, and actually every class that I taught as an undergrad professor with a quick write. And I would typically I might use a poem, I might use an excerpt from a larger piece of literature, I might use a chapter from a book. Like there's some really good novels that have short chapters like Sharon Draper's Out of My Mind. That first chapter is a phenomenal example of something you could use for a quick write because it's 2 pages long. But it ends with, it talks about her collecting all these words. And then it ends with, I have not spoken one word. I am 11 years old, and it just drops. What a great quick write. Written conversations, just that is connected to that right around the text, but also you give your students maybe a prompt or a question or something, based on a lesson that you just taught, and say, okay, write any questions down you have about this, or what do you think about what happened to this character, or what do you think about such and such, and then they pass it to a friend and just write back and forth. I use a lot of authentic ways to teach dialogue. One way that I really love with dialogue is I'll play a foreign soap opera typically, and I like to use soap operas because people are very dramatic. Now y'all find the right scene, okay? You got to make sure you find the right one. But I'll pick a scene from a soap opera that is foreign that most of my students don't speak that language. And I'll play that clip and I'll give students a note card and I'll say, okay, I want you to write the dialogue for this scene. And what students realize is because you don't speak Portuguese or whatever the language is, you have to rely on other things to figure out what the characters are saying. So you have to look at the setting. So if they're in a hospital, they're probably talking about hospital or health related things. So what I'm asking might be about somebody's prognosis or when are they going to get out of the hospital. So you see, I'm using the setting to dictate my problem and thus dictate my language that I'm using my dialogue. You also have to use body language and their gestures and how close somebody is to somebody, what the tone is. And you just write the dialogue, you write the story. And my favorite part of that activity is these students give you these fantastic grand explanations of what's happened to these characters. And then they ask me, they're like, okay, what really happened? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't speak Portuguese. But all of those things that y'all just said sound awesome. I mean, they all sound legit. And you have textual evidence that supports it. You have textual evidence to support them asking about, how many months does he have to live because they're in a hospital and he's in a hospital bed and there's all these nurses and he's hooked up to all these IVs. It sounds plausible to me. And then I use greeting cards a lot for teaching audience and purpose. So I noticed that a lot of kids don't they write for the same audience, which is a pretty informal one. And so one of the ways that I teach audience is through utilizing birthday cards. So I'll get a whole bunch of birthday cards and I will, put them in a pile and I'll give students a list of people they need to send a birthday card to. Your 80-year-old Sunday school teacher, your best friend who's afraid of dogs, your friend in your class, your person in your class who you don't really like. And I just make up audiences. Because see, the purpose doesn't change. Happy birthday. All those people. 80-year-old woman, scared dog person you can't stand. They're all having a birthday, so you're saying the same thing. But how you say it is different because the audience has shifted. So then they have to tell me why they chose a specific card for a specific audience. So I sent the card to the person who's afraid of dogs. I sent him the one with all the little kittens on it because I don't want him scared at the mailbox. And the person that I don't really like, I sent them a picture of the one that had the garden gnome on it. The price on it on the back was 50 cents because I'm not going to spend $5 on one of those pop-up cards for him. I don't even like him. So do you see what's happening? They're saying the same thing. Your message and your purpose is the same. It's how you say it. So I use that as an example of like your audience has to shift. Okay. And then you can use images for all kinds of things in writing. I like them because they take almost no planning, y'all. Like this one, I just pulled up one day when I was in a PL and I needed to do something different. And I pulled this up and said, hey, y'all find the science in this picture. Make a list of all the things that you see that are science related. Right, there's all kinds of stuff you could do with, you could do climate, you could talk about ecosystems, habitat. Now find the social studies in this picture. You could talk about geography. You could talk about economy. You could, topography. Now find the math in this picture. You could do shapes. You could do volume. You could do height, circumference. Okay. All, again, same picture. So all your people, your friends who you team teach with, and you're trying to figure out a writing thing to do, use the same picture, but have them find the different subject in every class. Now in ELA, I do it a little bit differently. And I like to use wordless picture books. So wordless picture books are not just for people who don't read alphanumeric text yet, because some of these wordless picture books are highly complex. So don't count these out if you're a high school person or middle grades person, or if you say, well, my kids, they won't like this. Yes, they will, because Flotsam is highly complex. And you just have to read them differently. So what I'll do sometimes is I'll take a picture from a wordless picture book and we'll do something like this. So we'll take out a piece of paper and I'll have them label it. And we're not going to do this because we don't have time. But I would have students make a list of nouns, a list of verbs, and a list of adjectives that would go with one of the pictures. So if I were going to do this in my class, I would show them this picture and I would say, okay, I want you to make a list of nouns that go with this picture. And I would do that real quick. Then I would say, give me verbs. Now give me adjectives. Now you got this word bank. And by the way, I'm not going to tell the students that they're going to be writing a descriptive sentence. They don't need to know that. Okay, we're just going to do it and I'll tell them later. So after they've got their word bank, then I'm going to say, now use your list to create an NVA squared sentence. That means I want you to use one noun, one verb, and two adjectives to describe this picture. What happens is you're going to end up with much more beautiful and complex sentences because you had that word bank to go from. Now, you don't have to just use wordless picture books. You can use calendar pictures. And I like to do those because I start off with giving everybody a very different calendar picture. So like somebody has one with balloons and somebody's got one with a fall leaf setting and, and we do the same activity, nouns, verbs, adjectives, NVA squared. And then I'll post the pictures up in my room. I'll have them each, write their sample sentence on a note card. And when they come in the next day, I pass those note cards out and you have to find the sentence that describes the picture. Okay. That's easy the first go round. But the next time I do it, everybody has a picture that is a winter scene. So you have to be deeper than just there's snow in the picture. So then that's a good way for you to teach close reading of an image and revision and that specific detail. I do the exact same activity, nouns, verbs, adjectives, NVA squared sentence, picture, note card, come in the next day. Well, then because they're all snow settings, you have to read really, really closely and you have to look for specific detail. If you can't figure out whose picture your sentence matches with, then you're going to go find that person. I'm going to help you find that person. And you're going to tell them what detail could they have added to their picture or to their sentence that would have made it where you would have known this is what this one matches. That becomes that specific detail and that solid, good, thick description in descriptive writing. So, and then I'm always looking for inspiration in the world we live in. So, Dolly Parton during COVID did this cool thing called the Dolly Parton Challenge, and she posted 4 pictures of herself in 4 different social media platforms. And she used LinkedIn, Facebook, Tinder, and Instagram. And I looked at that and thought, oh my gosh, I can use that to teach audience and purpose. But because I don't want anybody getting fired, we removed Tinder and changed it to Snapchat. And I took this into a middle grades classroom, and it was a social studies class, and they were working on the civil rights era, and they had to choose a civil rights icon, and they had to find a picture that would fit with each of these different social media platforms and create a caption that was appropriate. So do you see what I'm teaching there? Audience and purpose. Okay. I'm also allowing them to summarize because captions are just summaries. And then they had a companion piece where they had to describe and defend why they chose the images they chose. And then I think it's the last thing. Instagram. I could not wrap my brain around what I should put on as a post versus what I should put on my story because I came to social media late. And I started asking my girls and their friends, how do they decide what to post versus what should go on their story? And every young person I asked said the same thing. They said, I post things that are important that I want to go back and look at, and I put stuff on my story that's fun, but I don't care if I see it again. That tells me that those young people know what a main idea is and they know what a supporting detail is. So I went back to my office and thought, how do I make this work for my literacy people? So I now, instead of asking students for a main idea, I'll put a statement on the board and I'll say, does this statement have post promise? Or is it story worthy? Because if it has post promise, it means it's a main idea. If it's story worthy, it's a supporting detail. That's another real world example. So all these things that we talked about today, and then a whole bunch more that I didn't get to, are in the books that I've written so far on your screen. And right from the beginning is coming out in a couple of weeks. And I think y'all got a chance to win it in a second. But if you have questions, I hope you'll stay in touch. So follow me on social media. Reach out to me via email if you have any questions. I always love to work with teachers and come see y'all. I do PL all over the country. So if you need anything, you just holler at me. But thanks for listening to me talk to you on this Thursday night. And Margaret, I did it. I left you like 4 minutes.
And just thank you again to Rebecca Harper for today's presentation.
Anytime. And Margaret, somebody asked what the bug book was. That's Amy Stewart's Wicked Bugs and Wicked Plants. Somebody had asked that in the chat. But thank y'all for being here and thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.